Shabbat Shalom and welcome to our newest year of Talmud. We wanted to introduce our newest assistant rabbi named Eder Matan Rosenberger. He's right now just a young assistant rabbi, but he's kind of taken it. He doesn't say all that much, but he observes everything. And he's a true believer. He's almost had this with his mother's milk, shul. And so, Elisa, welcome back. And Eder, welcome to you. Yay. So, for our first class this new year, which is happening on the day that tonight is Selichot, and we really begin the high holiday, I wanted to ask you to kind of hold two questions in your mind as you think about Selichot, Rosh Hashanah, which of course is next Shabbos, and Yom Kippur. One is, do you want to be working on your beliefs? Usually for the high holiday season, we think about working on our deeds. I'm always late. I need to be more punctual. I always fly off the handle. I need to be more even-keeled. I'm always envious. I need to be more grateful. I'm always critical. I need to see the light most positive. That's what we usually think about deeds. Do you want to be in the market of changing your beliefs or repairing your beliefs or restoring your beliefs? Do you want to be thinking about, I need to actually think again about God. I need to think again about my relationship to faith kinds of issues. That's the first question. And then the second question is, if you do, how do you do that? If you want to work on your beliefs, how do you work on your beliefs? And I'll just share one vignette, and then we'll get into our content. This lecture, the sources here come from a lecture that Daniel Hartman did at Hartman. It was the opening lecture. And he talks about the importance of creed, believing stuff in Judaism. And he says in his lecture, it's online, you can watch it, that he's always envied people who have more faith than he does. He's always envied people who have more belief than he does. And that's something that he wants to work on. And I thought to myself, yes, I will try to do that too. And then I realized, I said Kaddish for my father, my first father, when I was 20 years old. And I was saying it at Harvard Hillel, which is mostly an Orthodox minyan. And my most vivid memory from 40 years later is envy at the mostly Orthodox people who had real kavanah. And I would say the Amidah, and it would kind of be over somewhat like that. And I'd think about my dad, and I'd think about my day, what's going on during the day. And on a good day, I'd think about some of the words in the prayers. And then I'm done. And I would look around and I would see true kavanah and much longer amidahs and deep connection and deep conviction and deep faith. And I thought, wow, I wish I could have that. Now I'm saying Kaddish 42 years later. And when I say Kaddish, I think about my father, my second father. I think about my day. On a good day, I think about some of the words. But I still have the fastest Amidah in the West. And especially when I'm in Israel davening with my brother-in-law Shul, his, again, Orthodox synagogue, their Amidahs last forever and with, a lot of intensity and conviction that I don't muster and can't muster. So the questions are, do you want to work on your beliefs? And if you don't, then good. But if you do, how do we do it? So, on those questions, and let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah, and then we'll get into our sources. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu, v'fi amcha be'Yisrael, v'nihya anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha be'Yisrael, kulanu yod'ei shemecha v'lamdei Toratcha lishma, Baruch atah Adonai hamalamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah. So the packet that you have is 18 sources from Daniel Hartman, and it's, as they say in Hebrew, maleh v'gadush, rich and full. I want to just kind of break it up into 3 different parts, and then we'll explore each part with my colleagues here, and then we can talk about all of it in our conversation. Here's the first part. Daniel begins his lecture by noting that Christianity is a religion of faith, that in their own language they are justified by faith. That is to say, if I believe that Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, died on the cross for my sins, then that's the work I need to do. And the first several sources here, the first 3 sources, are Christian statements of creed, that if I believe Jesus died on the cross for my sins and he's my Lord and Savior, I'm good. And therefore, that's what makes the Torah the Old Testament, because if I have that faith, then I don't have to keep kosher. And if I have that faith, then I don't have to have a circumcision. As Christians put it, and it's in these sources, I'm circumcised in my heart. I have a circumcised heart. I don't need to circumcise my body. I have a circumcised heart because I believe in Jesus. And therefore, the laws of the Torah become Old Testament, and they're justified by faith. And the Christian critique is, by contrast to Christians who are about faith, Judaism is a religion of deed, not creed. That's a Christian critique. Right? We Christians, we've got the new word. We're about faith. We're about creed. Old Jews, with their Old Testament, they're about deed, not creed. They actually have to keep kosher. They actually do the sacrifices. They actually still have to circumcise themselves. Can you believe it? Right? And they're deed, not creed. And Daniel points out that's a Christian critique that Jews have internalized. And that we have then said it to ourselves, the famous Cohn goes to shul to pray to God, and Garfinkel goes to pray to talk to Cohn. For all the Garfinkels in the world, doesn't matter. Let Cohn talk to God. Garfinkel, you talk to Cohn. We're about deed, not creed. What part 1 of the sources are that we are filled with creed. That Judaism is first and foremost a religion of beliefs, and the part 1 of this is going to be that that the Torah tells us there is a God. We are commanded to believe in God. That's actually the first commandment. Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher titicha me'eretz Mitzrayim beit avadim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Believe in God is the first. Believe, B-E-L-I-E-V-E. I guess I do spell. Belief is the first commandment. And then also God is one. Shema Yisrael Adonai Adonai Echad. Also, God created the world, etc. That's part 1. So we actually have a lot of creed. It's not true that we're about deed, not creed. We're about creed as well as deed. Part 2, this is going to be harder, is Maimonides makes such a tzimus about creed, such a tzimus about belief, that you'll find his language off-putting, and we'll look about this. Now, we all know it from Yigdal, the 13 principles. But he says that believing stuff, that Jews are supposed to believe, Jews are expected to believe, Jews are commanded to believe. And if you don't believe, then you're out the system. And you're going to see that. And then part 3 is going to be, well, if belief is so important, and if we don't believe, then what do we do? Part 3 is going to be about recovery. What do we do with belief? So that's 18 sources broken up into 3 parts. Dear colleagues, can we turn to page 3? And this is Daniel's point that unlike the Christian critique, which so many Jews have internalized, that we're about deed, not creed, we're all about creed. On page 3, source 5, when God began to create heaven and earth, that there is a God and God created the world. Then source 6, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. So that's like believe in God, and God is the God of Exodus, God is the God of redemption. Then there is Adonai Echad, God is one, etc. Just so that I'll just do one more point here, and then we'll break for conversation. If you look on page 4, Maimonides on page 4 in the Mishnah Torah says that the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of wisdom is to know that there is a primary being who brought into being all existence, and the knowledge of this concept is a positive commandment as implied, I am God, your Lord. In other words, you got to believe, and there's stuff you got to believe, and the Torah is filled with it. So, dear colleagues, how do you engage this part of our tradition?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I want to put a question to the table. What is the problem of being a religion of creed and not deed?
Well,
Or the opposite. What is our problem with being a religion of deeds and not creeds?
so
I honestly think
right.
that based on what you said before, that Daniel Hartman went, he's envious of people who believe more,
Right.
that this is his own therapy session, trying to convince himself that he believes.
Well, yeah, colleagues, I mean, I can answer that, but I've been talking too much. So, colleagues, what?
I want to jump
Oh,
in after you.
no, I think there are a lot of Garfinkels who come to talk to Cone. And that's Daniel, that's me, that's most of Temple Emmanuel, from what I can tell, are Garfinkels who want to talk to Cone. I mean, most of us live for the Kiddush, all right? But I think what he's pointing out, I don't think this is therapy. I think he's actually asking us to encounter a hard truth, which is our religious tradition does have a lot of belief in it, and I think it would behoove us to wrestle with, to grapple with the belief that's in the tradition that's not necessarily in our heart. Dan?
I'm going to try to answer you, Elias, because I have the same question because I grew up on that. I actually had no idea that the idea that Na'aseh v'nishma that we do,
Right.
therefore that helps us believe, do the mitzvot, and that puts you in the position. I always thought that was a Jewish concept. I didn't realize that was a Christian critique of Judaism, so therefore I actually believe that by that you can say anything you want, but it's your actions on which you are judged. And so, therefore, I believe in I'm with Elias on this, that we really should, that we are really a religion that because of our belief, our actions drive that belief, but also our actions also drive who we become. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Well, just so I understand you before moving to Michelle and Elisa, are you saying belief matters or it doesn't matter?
I'm saying belief matters, but I think that we get to believe by what we do.
So you're saying belief matters, but it's secondary or tertiary?
I guess so.
That's what I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Michelle?
I picking up from Dan, I think it's really important that it's not a either or in
Yeah, that's
our
it, yeah.
tradition. The
Yeah.
idea is that you will do and then you will believe. It actually is doing in the service of cultivating belief, which
Yeah.
is an important principle for us as Jews, that you don't always need to be, I mean, even Abraham didn't always have moments where he was completely like, yeah, you're totally right, God. There were moments where Abraham comes and says, God, I don't think that what you're doing is right. But Abraham's having a conversation with God, and Abraham is doing in service of coming close to God. And I think at our best, that's our Jewish ideal, that we do in service of embodying the ideals of our belief.
Right. And Michelle, what happens so we're wrestling, we're doing in the service of, what if we do and we never quite get to belief?
So that's I think, look, there are two ways to look at that, right? One is if you do and you never quite get to believing, right? Okay, you tried, you were on the path, you were in conversation. That conversation itself mattered and made you better because you were always wrestling with, can I do more? And the other way to look at it is to say, well, if you never get there, you still did the things. So, yay, congratulations.
But in which case, I just want to speak truth here. In which case, belief in the end doesn't really matter that much. I mean, here's
No, wait, whoa, hold on.
no, I'm not. But if it does, if what really matters is the deed,
Yeah.
and you wrestle and wrestle, but you don't believe, then does belief really matter if what's really primary is that you're doing the deed?
I mean, look, you can look at this through the frame of the Talmud's concept
Right.
of which is more important
Learning or
to
doing,
learn
right.
or to do, and the answer is learning because it will ultimately lead you to doing.
Right.
You look at it in the same way, which is more important, doing or believing? Well, the doing, because the doing ultimately leads you to the believing,
Right.
and not the other way around. And I think that the ultimate aspiration when you're looking at that hierarchy
Right.
is to have a relationship with God and to be part of our people's conversation with holiness over many generations.
So, Michelle, I love what you just said. I'm just wondering how you square it with Maimonides. So, I'd love you to read, if you don't mind, Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah introduction to chapter Chelek. Chelek means portion, and there's this idea that all Israel gets a Chelek, a portion in the world to come, except for there are some people who don't get a Chelek. There's some people who don't get a portion, and one of the groups that don't get a portion are people who have improper beliefs. And this is Maimonides, right? So this is Maimonides trying to say, everybody, you could be a sinner, you could do all kinds of bad stuff, but you still have a portion in the world to come, but you don't have a portion if you have improper belief. And this is Maimonides. So I'm wondering if you could read that and then explain how you react. We're on
Sure,
page
it's on
five,
page 5.
bottom of page 5.
When a man believes in all these fundamental principles and his faith is thus clarified, he is then part of that Israel whom we are to love, pity, and treat as God commanded with love and fellowship. Even if a Jew should commit every possible sin out of lust or mastery by his lower nature, he will be punished for his sins, but will still have a share in the world to come. He is one of the sinners of Israel. But if a man gives up any one of these fundamental principles, he has removed himself from the Jewish community. He is an atheist, a heretic, an unbeliever who cuts among the plantings. We are commanded to hate him and destroy him. Of him it is said, "Shall I not hate those who hate you, Lord?"
Yes. So what do you do with that?
For me, it's all about the social context in which Maimonides was engaging the people that he was talking
Right.
to. I think there's a lot of fear, a lot of pressure that the world out there has something to say. It's more compelling for our young people, and it's more, we're losing a piece of our population. They're not honoring in the way that they should. And hey, let's make a really strong rule so that if you don't believe this stuff, that core
Right.
Jewish stuff, then you're out, right? And whenever we say you're out, what we're really saying is, like, it's really scary to me that our Jewish tradition might enable us to reach a little bit outside of our
Right.
of ourselves to accept a different belief. We have this even today. I mean, even today we have people who are very, go back, you don't need today. I mean, Eliza and I are here. There are people who are still, this is a problematic belief for the Jewish people that women should be equally invested in the mitzvot. We can't believe those things. For me, what I make of this, Maimonides was not widely accepted by everybody in his time. He got a lot of pushback for
Right.
this. There were a lot of people who said, no, thank you, but no thank you.
Aliza, I love your voice.
It just feels to me like it's not about belief or action. That Christianity said you don't need the action, that belief is enough. And Judaism says it's belief and action. And that might be Naseh v'nishma, it might be do it and then believe, but it might actually be believe and then do it.
Right.
And we're not separating the two. We're about full body, full spirit, all four worlds, all four Kabbalistic worlds of physical, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, that your whole being has to be invested in your life. And it doesn't work to just have one part of you adhering to tradition and the other, the rest of you not doing anything.
Yeah,
And
the perfect
yet-
summation.
And yet, I agree with all of you what you said, but in everyday life, we will find many more people who say, I'm going to do circumcision, I'm going to do bar mitzvah, because that's what we Jews do. Do I believe in God? Not necessarily, but that's what we do. You have many more people doing that by people saying the opposite. I strongly believe in God, I'm not doing the bar mitzvah. So I'm not so sure the balance is 50-50.
Right.
But
and
I just want to say, so
please.
the perfect summation of what Elisa said is "B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol yadecha." In that, if people, with all that, when we believe in God, we Shema Yisrael and Eloheinu, that we believe in God with the entirety of our soul, the entirety of our strength, and the entirety of our heart. So it is actually all rolled into one. And when people ask, does Judaism have a creed? I've always been led to believe that yes, our creed is the Shema and the V'ahavta.
So we also have a creed called Yigdal, which is on page 5. And I want to ask you about what do you do with parts of our creed that, if you're being entirely honest about it, you just can't really accept. For example, that God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. Maui. That God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. The Morocco earthquake. That God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked. Well, I don't know, maybe the Holocaust. So what do you do with that God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked, your good friend or loved one who has cancer? So what do you do with parts of our creed? I mean, it's hard to get bent out of shape about Adonai Echad, but what do you do with parts of our creed that are really tough to own?
You have to thank me every Friday night what I do for you and your own spirituality. I sing Igdal in such a high key that you can never reach it, so you can never say out loud the words.
We'll go directly to Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu.
So you are lucky, It's because of me that you don't get to say these words.
No, I want to respond actually, because many years ago I really felt pretty strongly that one should believe what one prays. If you don't, why are you wasting your time in prayer? And one of the ways to approach that is the way that our movement and some other liberal movements have approached it, which is to change the words. And for me, I happened upon what works for me theologically, which is to reframe the words and recontextualize. There's this beautiful moment where we see our ancestors not just praying to God, but also calling God to the mat. I mean, I think Rosh Hashanah is one of those places when we think of the stories of our ancestors before us, and that calling God to the mat moment is how I filter my prayer, which is like, hey, God.
What does that mean, by the way, calling God to the mat? What do you mean by that?
Yigdal, I'll tell you. When I say Yigdal and I say that God, is the one who rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked, I'm like, all right, God, you listening?
Right.
Hello, right? So, this is what you should be. This is what you should do. And it's part of my internal conversation with God to say, I have these principles, I have these ideas, and I have these ideals, and I want to be in conversation about not just you fulfilling them, but how I can fulfill them and further your goal on this world, that should indeed be the case. It's not the case now.
So you channel kind of doubt into a chutzpahdik challenge to God.
Exactly.
In the kind of chutzpahdik challenge tradition, but then also not only challenge God, but challenge you to build that.
Can I say
world.
something?
Yeah.
In regards to your opening question about what are we in the market for, in my own case, I'm always working on my faith because I love rituals. I love the deeds, and that's what usually I'm for. When we skip Oshanot, anyways, no, just kidding.
Right.
But I'm working constantly on my faith, and there are some things that openly I can read here in the Igdal that I said I strongly believe in that, and then the other thing is I've never seen that, and I've never seen in history that happened. So it's not necessarily that we believe or not believe, it's we perhaps don't believe in the totality of what Sidur and Mahzor say.
I was just going to say, I think this is also a case where these beliefs would shape action in a more powerful way than other beliefs. And so this is a case where Judaism's attachment to belief and action shapes beliefs that might not actually be possible, because if you believe that God rewards the righteous, that's going to make you act in a certain way. And if you believe that God lifts up the upright, you're going to do things in a particular way. And so it's not necessarily, and I think this is the key thing for us, we're willing to attach ourselves to ideals that might not be real in order to actualize potential action that could be healing and helpful.
And that is the recovery part, which we're going to get to. That's part 3, which I'll get to. I just, before we get, so hold on to that comment, and we'll get to it in a minute. But Elias, I want to talk to you for a second about the comment about working on our faith. I mean, most of us have enough tread on our tire. We've lived enough years that we can go back and, let's say, look at pictures of ourselves from, let's say, 40 years ago, and my college graduation pictures, and when you look at a picture of yourself from 40 years ago, you can see how you've changed physically, how you've dressed, the glasses have changed, the clothes have changed, your hair has changed, grayer, etc. Lots of changes. And it kind of raises the question of the physical stuff. It's easy to see how it has changed. My question is, if you were to look at a picture of Elias Rosenberg from 40 years ago, or Dan, or Michelle, or Eliza, not quite 40 years ago, if you were to look back at a picture of yourself decades ago, the hair and the clothes change. Fashions and what you eat and drink and how you eat and drink and what you watch on TV, all that changes. But would you say that your faith has fundamentally changed as much as your clothing and hair do over the last 40 years?
First of all, I look much better now than 40 years ago. I was 13 at the time. Anyways, yeah, absolutely.
How so? How
well,
was
I was a boy. I didn't know what I was doing. At the time, I already loved singing at synagogue. I had no connection with the text or whatsoever, and my faith has been shaped by my experiences, life experiences, and also learning more. I think that learning and studying and reading takes you to a different place where you start seeing things in a different way.
Colleagues, anyone else?
Yeah, I'm actually like with Elias on that I think fundamentally it's not different, but I think it is actually at a different level for me. The other thing that Elias said earlier is you talked about loving ritual and stuff. And as we think about our interactions with our congregants all the time, people most of the time, at least when they come to me, they don't ask me what should I believe. They ask me what should I do. How should I deal with this ritual? How should I deal with that? So I think that this concept of doing leading to belief, I think, is actually fundamental to the conservative movement as we are. Anyway.
Radically different. I grew up in Malibu, California. I mean, probably enough said. But, for me, actually, it is belief and changing my belief and my relationship with God that has me sitting here today. Because one of the things that I experienced as a child was a Reconstructionist Judaism, which really said to me that, God is just sort of everywhere. We're belief, we're deed, not belief. Don't worry about God. That's been fractured since the Holocaust. It's not relevant to our lives. We're a community, and the community decides on our folkways. We'll continue with the traditions that really matter to us. And to me, that was not sufficient to have me interested in or engaged with Jewish life. Okay, if that's true, there are a lot of other communities out there that could be interesting or compelling. To me, it was through the process of coming into relationship with what I feel is a God who asks more of me that I became the religious person I am today.
Thank you, Michelle. Aliza, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think that I, as a young person, very much attached myself to these theologies that are just totally unreal. And so I think becoming an adult has sort of forced me to grapple with the reality of the world and then to come back to these principles. And I would say that my faith changes every day, all the time. Even just the summer and maternity leave was a really radically different experience of faith for me. It was the first time that I didn't have a davening practice because I couldn't tell when morning was, because I was just up every hour of the day. And that I just it was I've never experienced a different reality like that. And that really changed my relationship with God and my relationship with the world. And that I think for me, faith is a way that you deal with the difference between how you think things are going to be and how things actually are. And faith is the process of grappling with that.
Wes, can you
Yeah.
tell us your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I wish I had as happy a trajectory as the four of you, which I don't. In other words, I hear in each of your stories real deepening, real radical change, et cetera, et cetera. When I think about me at 20 saying Kaddish for my father, me at 62 saying Kaddish for my father, I'm still asking a lot of the same questions that do not have answers, and causing a lot of and also I would say that the world has changed much for the worse in the last 42 years. The division, the toxicity, the negative energy, the brokenness in Israel, in America, the fact that democracy is under siege throughout the world, the fact that hate is on the rise, the fact that we have to worry about swatting at the high holidays in 2023 in Newton, Massachusetts. All of that stuff leaves the questions that I asked as a 20-year-old not only still unanswered, but unanswered and more painfully unanswered. So I wish I had your kind of trajectory. I don't. I just
But you
have a lot
had
of
a
questions.
huge change in your life from 40 years ago. You became a rabbi.
Yeah, yeah. So now I get to ask these questions all day long, but I still don't have answers. But what I want to close our time with the rest. So part one of this class from Daniel was that actually creed matters a lot, and what you believe. God bless you, cutie pie. That belief matters a lot. Part two is he gives us this Maimonides stuff about if you don't believe, you don't get your chalik, which is very off-putting for moderns, and requires a kind of a resolution and recovery. So Daniel does not use this phrase, but I'll use my phrase to talk about part three of this class, which is uh, American pragmatism from William James, who wrote Varieties of Religious Experience. And James has the following test of a religious tradition, which is, by the fruits you shall know it, not by the roots. By the fruits you shall know it, not by the roots. In other words, if there's a religious tradition, X, Y, or Z, right, how do we evaluate it? Judge it by the fruits, not by the roots. Judge it by the fruits. What does this religious tradition bring into the world? If you have a religious tradition which encourages its adherents to go and murder innocents, that's not a good religious tradition. If you have a religious tradition which encourages its adherents to go and be selfless and go to places in the world that are suffering and add love and care, that's a good religious tradition. So what Daniel points out is kind of to what all of you have been talking about, that belief is frequently connected to action in ways that creates a virtue cycle, that you believe and then you act and then you believe and then you act, and they're mutually reinforcing. So take a look on page 9 of the handout. Let's say one of the big beliefs is God freed us from slavery in Egypt. Anochi Adonai Elohecha. Okay, so there's an action concomitant that comes from this. So look on the bottom of page 9. This is text 15. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. In other words, whether you believe or you don't believe that God took us out of the land of Egypt, we come from a people that was vulnerable, and since you know what it's like to be vulnerable, then be compassionate to the vulnerable, right? That move is a recurrent move. So if you look a few texts above, God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So let's say that goes whoosh. What does that even mean? Creation, science, poetry, what am I supposed to do with that, right? Here's what the Torah does with it that Daniel brings. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is with your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and then rested on the seventh. Therefore God blessed the seventh and hallowed it. Therefore all the people in your orbit are supposed to rest on the seventh. So in both of these cases, you take a theological proposition. God saved us from Egypt. Therefore, be kind to the vulnerable. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Therefore, make sure that the people in your orbit have rest on the seventh day. So there's this whole action, faith, concomitant. Colleagues, comment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, then here's this question: What I want to come back.
Wait.
Yeah. So I want to come back.
The comment is clear to me.
Right.
This thing about number, what is it, 15?
Right.
It's a clear demonstration that we are much more about deeds than creed.
Correct. And so I want to come.
Because it doesn't
No,
matter
no,
if
no,
you
no.
believe that God
Right.
took us from Egypt.
Right.
He believes what you do.
Right.
And you treat the
No, but you have
strangers
to
and the
say
foreigners
it.
well.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you.
No. I win.
No, the fact, here's the thing. If you believe that God took you out of Egypt, right, then you actually cultivate compassion. Wow, I was there. I had this experience. I am now responsible for those who are still in bondage somewhere in the world. Now, can you get there the other way? Can you say, oh, I'm just going to cultivate compassion, and then maybe, I can really like this story? Maybe, yeah, probably. You could do the thing and then get to the faith. You could do the thing without having the faith. But you can't have the faith and not wrestle with the call to do the thing.
And I would say it's also paired together for a reason. It doesn't say just do the thing. It says have this consciousness to do the thing, because that deed is more rich because of your consciousness. It's not enough to just do it. Like, you could do it, but there's a richness that comes
But the
in.
consciousness doesn't
shapes a
come from
community.
believing that God took us from Egypt.
For
No,
sure
but
it does.
shapes a
No.
community that believes our core value. One of our core values is going to be to see the unseen, to help the forgotten, to love the stranger as ourselves. Those are core principles. They're in the water. We don't even know about them. They're shaping our thinking. And because they shape our thinking, they inevitably shape the way we approach
Yeah,
the
but
world.
one point is that you don't need to believe in God to make this happen.
And I would add, I think most of Temple Emmanuel, from my experience, is very good with be compassionate to the stranger, and not very good with the God who took us out of Egypt, because where was that God during the Holocaust?
Yeah,
And
I
where was
actually-
that God
I-
with
I don't
Morocco?
think-
So,
I don't-
can I just make the point that in the end, I mean, I like what you say, and I think what you say is authentic Judaism, but I think it's not just to name it. I think most of us say yes to the action piece and end up kind of giving up on the faith piece, or not caring about the faith piece, or because the action piece is what matters, our faith doesn't actually evolve or change or deepen. Yeah.
I want to call into this room David Wolpe,
Yes.
who, like Rabbi David Wolpe, gave this sermon that made, at least in Los Angeles, it made the front
Right.
page of the newspaper. Like,
Right.
rabbi of a major congregation says the Exodus didn't happen.
Right.
And one of his points in that is that actually the story doesn't have to necessarily do with God. Like, I believe that it has to do with God. It speaks to my relationship with God. But if you can ironically not believe in God and still believe the story that God took us out of Egypt, right? What do I mean by that? Meaning that you can make it an abstraction enough that you say, this story is the story of my people, the story of our values, and it's not just God that shapes our creed, but also core faith stories and experiences that we shared. We shared the experience of going out of Egypt together, and that experience, regardless of how we see God's role in it, still shapes the faith and the belief of who we are as a people.
Right. And Neil Gaiman wrote this book in the 90s, Sacred Fragments. And he's all about the stories that we tell. His word for it, which rubs some people the wrong way, but it's a beautiful word, is yes, is myth. That there are these myths that we tell, the stories that we tell, and the stories are true. We make them true by having Pesach every year, regardless of whether there actually is a God. So, colleagues, I wanna end this piece of the class by just coming back to the orienting question, which is, it's Slichot tonight, and it's Rosh Hashanah next week. And the question is, do we, each of us, the clergy team at Temple Manual, do we need to be working on our beliefs or not?
Yes.
And what are you going to be working on?
So I think that for me, the beliefs that I'm thinking about working on are ideas that I have about myself or about the world that cause pain. That I think about what I should or could have done, and that perseveration creates challenge. So those ideas and getting to a God that working on my relationship with God and what I believe about God, that what is God capable of and where is God showing up and how does that impact me and the world, excuse you. Those are things that I'm going to be working on.
Yeah, and tonight we are going to be doing a little extended version of Avinu Malkeinu in a beautiful setting where we ask God to end starvation and malice and different things, and that is exactly what you're saying, Alisa. That's the hardest part that we have to work on believing.
Yeah. For me, it's really very similar. I after all these years, I still every year around this time think about how my relationship with God can be deeper on a daily basis, and not just around the high holidays.
Mm.
It's all faith. It's all about our faith in the process that we can lay out our shortcomings before something bigger than ourselves and do better. Do better tomorrow than we did today.
Yeah, so I just want to name a big disconnect, guys. It's all about faith. You're all about God. You're all about your relationship with God. So many of the folks that I see in the synagogue just are not God people. So they're just not God people. They don't care about God. They don't resonate to God. God goes whoosh. And that just happens all the time. You know, when Harold Kushner died, and I did a bunch of teachings about God from Harold Kushner, the response, you remember this was a bar mitzvah class, like no hands are going up. And I said, geez, this class is really underachieving. I've obviously failed. Why? And then every hand went up, and they said, we're not God people. So I want to just ask you a question, which is, if it's all about faith and we're all about God and deepening our relationship with God, but much of our congregation is not God people, how do you navigate that disconnect?
So I don't know, maybe it's my Reconstructionist roots, but I really believe very strongly. I said the word faith. I didn't say it's all about God, right? We have God, and for me, that's my go-to, because there's something bigger than myself that I have a relationship with is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. That God is who I'm going to be having the conversation with. But the fact is that you say it goes whoosh, but I would ask those of you in the room and those of you online, how many of you are engaged in a process at this season because our Jewish tradition says, hey, it's time to take a look at yourself, where you're kind of examining yourself and saying, where were my shortcomings? How did I do this year? Can I do better? Maybe you're even seeking out some people in your life where you want to say you're sorry. Why are you doing that? That is the faith.
They are agreeing with us that we end up thinking more about deeds than creeds.
Well,
but I'm saying there is a narrative.
Yeah.
There is a story that our tradition has helped us shape, and that is belief.
And let me just end with this idea, because as you know, I am very, I struggle a lot with God and connecting with God, and always have, and all those questions, always do, and always will. But I will say one thing that that I pick up every year, and I've been wondering for the last 27 years, how does this grow? Is what happens with all the people here, beloved friends and members who are not God people, comes into Elah, and they come up to the ark as the last hour of the holiday season, and they're literally crying. And they're literally pouring out their hearts, to the God they don't believe in, the other 364 days a year. And that's real, right? They get on, and these are the skeptics and the scientists, and they don't believe, and they had and the Holocaust, and Morocco, and Maui, and cancer, and they don't believe, and how could you, and what are you? And they come up, and they are deeply invested in that moment with the God that the other part of the year they don't believe in, but they do here. And my question has always been, how do we grow that? Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.